Well, we're finishing up Mark chapter 6 today, and we are in Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 45. As we think about what Mark has told us in his story so far, I'd just like to remind you that Mark is telling a story. He, we believe, took the facts from the Apostle Peter, that he wrote the story down based on Peter's experiences, and that's pretty well established and accepted by people who are biblical scholars and study that kind of thing. But as Mark tells the story, he has written it not just as a news reporter might, but he's written it as an author, as the Holy Spirit has inspired him. Mark is showing us who Jesus is. And interestingly, today, as we think about knowing Jesus, we realize that many people who call on his name don't really know him very well. We know that because of silly things that they say about him. We know that because as we know Jesus, he changes us from the inside out. And we often find people criticizing the church and saying, I just couldn't be part of that work as being something godly because I know people who are mean, who are cheating other people in their business dealings, who are gossiping, who lie, who do all kinds of things that at my standard, just no one would do that if they really were who God says he is, if they were his people. And Mark today shows us in just a very significant way that you can be very close to Jesus. You could have been one of his 12 special group and still lived with him. At this point in the story, he has been in his ministry about 2 years. He's got about another year, a little bit more than a year left. And so they have stayed with this man for 2 years and still don't know him. Now, I've heard people who've been in the military who say things like, going through just horrific battles when people are dying on every side and you're trying to help your fellow soldiers get to safety, and you're just really doing superhuman things almost, that no one really knows you like the person who was kind of holed up with you in that battle, that your husband or your wife cannot really know you quite like that it really shows what you're made of, who you are on the inside. I've heard that many times. Well, I would say that just in that very similar way, people who are willing to take the time to spend with Jesus, more time than we're going to spend here this morning, but time in the sense of every waking moment, having an awareness, God never leaves you. You don't have to call him up and say, God, I need you here, right with me. God never leaves you. He's always there. And we'll see in this passage that even when the disciples believed Jesus was not with them, he knew very well what was happening. So Mark chapter 6, verse 45, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch even the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. This is the second time in Mark that we've heard this idea of touching the hem of his garment. We remember the woman with the issue of blood was just thinking, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, I know I would be healed. And she pressed through the crowd and sort of almost secretly reached out and touched his garment, and Jesus perceived that power had gone out from him. He knew she was healed. So the idea of touching almost without an active touch from the Lord is here presented again. And part of that is important for us today because we often both blame God and give God credit for things that really aren't God because we don't really know him very well. People, I would say, who are saying that the storm in Texas is the judgment of God and those people must have been so wicked and God just took them out, don't know the heart of Jesus. We don't see anything in Scripture like that, but it's convenient and common that we blame God for things without asking him, God, was that you? Because when we ask him, he witnesses to our spirit, you know me better than that. That's not who God is. He isn't today a God of judgment on people. So the disciples had had enough many times. Remember before the feeding of the 5,000 that we talked about last week, they were trying to get to a place to rest. The crowds were just so pushing against them, they couldn't even find time to eat. And then they were surprised to find, here they were going around the lake, finding them, and Jesus took time and not only taught them about who he was, but fed them. And we talked last week about how much work that was. I've never worked in a big, place where they served lots of food, but I've noticed how just continuous it is. Even like a school cafeteria, lunchroom, people just keep coming, they're hungry, and you just keep giving out food and giving out food. Well, we often just think of they started breaking the bread and the fish and then everyone was fed, but there was a lot of work to it. And when you're in Jesus' support staff, there's a lot of work to it. It's not just always just miracles, isn't this cool? So last story that we saw about the loaves, they bring up here again, and we talked about this a bit last week already, but I'd like us to think again about the fact that people who lived with Jesus saw that miracle and did not understand about the loaves. Now, probably their understanding was, we don't have to worry about food anymore. We've got the instant food maker. Just get a little bit of seed food and he'll make us more food and we never have to worry about that again. And people today often take that same kind of approach to God. They see something or they miss something. They say, why doesn't that happen anymore? And Jesus was not showing them that he was their new source of the marketplace. That's not what he was saying. He was showing them his authority over everything created. So food was one of those things. He was showing them that he was the creator. He's showing them as he walks on the water. He's not doing that just because it's easier than swimming and he doesn't get his clothes wet. He's doing that to show them, I created the sea, but he's not there just as God, is he? The Messiah wasn't just God coming to man. The Messiah was to be human. That was Israel's hope, that a human, a second Adam, would come and restore what had been destroyed by the first Adam. And so Jesus, in everything he does, is showing them, and today showing us, this is who God made you to be. Someone in authority over all things created. Someone in authority over the sea. Someone in authority over sickness. Someone in authority over evil and what the devil does. And some people get that a bit mixed up, and they have this kingdom now mentality. They say, okay, pew, go over into the parking lot. I don't need a pew there. They say, right now, I am able to be godlike. And that's not quite true either. We have this time almost like a preparation time. And it's not just a time to just wait until it gets better. You know, some of the songs we sing, like that we love, the tune and the worship to, like I'll Fly Away, says, you know, someday I'm just out of here. This world is a mess. God is giving us time to know Jesus, to know who he is, the person you're going to serve for eternity, while you can still back out. You know, we often focus on the part, well, if you don't get right with God before you die, it's too late. The thing is, you also have a choice to back out and say, I guess I don't want to be part of that. And we know many people today who that's their sense. We say, no, I don't need God. I don't want that. And that's part of God giving you free will. And there's really no way for you to know if you just blindly do what your parents taught you. Just go with what feels right. And never test that and say, who are you, God? Why do you let things happen the way they do? There's a health, there's a good relationship sense to us struggling with that and saying, I'm not always sure, God. I don't always know what the answer is. I don't always really know. What are you trying to do here? Well, his disciples were given 3 years to do that, and 2 years into the course, Mark is giving us kind of like the narrator's insight. They still didn't get it. If you think about the number of days, hours, minutes that they spent with Jesus and compare that to us who don't have him in the flesh right here to hug and hold and eat with, we're in this sort of difficult thing that we do called prayer, where we're trying to communicate with God and we're distracted by things, and we don't have just that 100% right there sense that they had. But even with that, even with seeing all those people healed, even with seeing all those miracles done, even with seeing the authority he took over demons and evil, even with seeing that, they still were not able to understand who is Jesus, and weren't really even all that worried about it. They were kind of thinking, we have got a good gig. This guy that we're following, he is the best. He can get rid of these Romans. We are so glad the day we decided to follow him, but they haven't really connected with who he really is. So when Mark gives us that insight and says, he ties that together, and he talks about, they thought Jesus was a ghost or some kind of weird thing, and they screamed and just were frightened, and they didn't have that sense that you sometimes get in prayer, that God's got your back, that he's right there with you. They were afraid, and that tells us they didn't know that was Jesus. And he says that's because their hearts were hard. Now, we often think that hard hearts are kind of like mean people. Hard hearts can be very kind people who are pretty nice, but their hearts are like this little stone that Chris gave me this morning. Chris has been with us for a year. And she is a blessing to us, and we're so glad that you've been with us. But that stone is hard. And if I hold it under water or anything, it's going to kind of just bounce off. It's not going to soak right into that stone. If it sits in water for a long time, the water may be able to get in, but it's not like a sponge. It's not soft like a piece of bread. It's not going to take in things. And Mark compares their hearts to something hard. He says their hearts are hard. And I think sometimes our hearts are hard. We're so afraid of being taken in, and we're skeptical, and we're savvy and careful. And so when Jesus is showing them who he is, they're holding on to their own understanding and not letting all of these things that Jesus is showing them show them who he is. And the important thing about that is if you don't know Jesus, you don't know yourself either. Right. Because how we know ourselves, who we really are created to be, not who the world tells us we are, not who our parents or even our loving grandma says we are, until we know who God sees us as, we don't really know ourselves. And that sense of not belonging, not understanding, never really feeling satisfied, never really getting it, searching after thrilling experiences and movies and games and rides and all that stuff is a hunger to say, who am I? And you don't know yourself until you know Jesus. So many people who are not even trying to know Jesus, who are in the sense ignoring God or even actively pushing him away and saying God doesn't exist, people in that sense don't even have a chance to ever get the satisfaction of knowing who they are. Now the trouble is that if you just take a little bit of Jesus with your life, your heart is hard. It cannot really pick up what God is showing you. It's like the water bouncing off my rock. You might get a little bit wet on Sunday when you come and feel a little bit better, but it dries right out. If your heart is hard, you're keeping yourself in this place of misery. Right. You're keeping yourself knowing God just enough so you can't really reject him, but never knowing him enough to know who you are or who he sees you to be. And knowing Jesus is something that cannot be fast-tracked. It doesn't help you know him better to go to Bible college. It doesn't help you know him better to say, I'm going to commit my life to solitary confinement and sit out on a high pinnacle somewhere. It cannot be fast-tracked. It has to be lived out in the daily things that happen to us. And it has to be lived out with a soft heart, which is a heart that says, whatever comes up for me, that's an opportunity for me to know who Jesus is. And it cannot be taught to you by someone else. You have to experience it. You have to experience life. You have to experience God's creation. You have to experience bad things. You have to experience pain and hurt and grieving and sorrow. You have to experience joy. And you have to experience other people winning and you feeling left by yourself and not really seeming to have things work out very well. You have to experience good things that you thank God for, and sometimes that you take credit for and you should thank God for. All those things that we call life are necessary. And people have tried all kinds of creative ways to just make that work better and to just get it really fast. And a fake relationship with Jesus is worse than none at all. Something that you take because you're worried you might go to hell someday is not what God is offering you. He's offering you the whole package or nothing. And we have tricked ourselves into all kinds of little man-made ways that we think are going to substitute for what God is really offering. He's only offering a comprehensive full deal. There are no half benefit packages. There's no part-time with God. It's all or nothing. He says here in verse 50 to the end something that bugs me. I wouldn't write this sentence. He says, "Take heart, it is I." Now really, the object of it is should be, it is me. He says, it is I. And I even, in foolishness and lack of understanding, initially looked for a different version. I thought, I don't like that, it is I. What does that mean? It is I. It just sounds kind of, But the idea that he's getting across here is to remind them of what God said to Moses. He said, tell them I am sent you. He's saying, it's God. Don't be afraid. You see me, right now you see me as a ghost. But when you see me tomorrow as Jesus, your friend, it's still God. It's still the great I am. It's still the only thing that is all powerful, that's all knowing. It's still the one who does not leave you, who does not have to be called up in dark moments or when you're really afraid. We may need to call, but he is never absent. As he was praying to his Father, he shows us Jesus, the man, still had to pray, and we have to pray. So as he goes up on the mountain to pray, we believe that that was a high place and that the sea, the whole 7 miles of it, was visible. And as he prayed, he could look and see them rowing. They're out in the middle of the sea, trying. They're good sailors, they're fishermen, they're strong, they know how to do this. This is the sea they've sailed the most. They know, you just keep waiting it out and the wind will come down and we'll be okay and we'll get to the other side, or we'll sink and die. They know that. They're out there struggling, and they have a sense of, well, why didn't he come with us? Remember the last time we were out in the storm? He calmed the storm. Where is he now when I need him? He was up on the mountain praying, and he could see them. And sometimes we're in that spot where we're struggling, trying so hard, and we don't see Jesus, and we think because we don't see him in our situation that he doesn't see us, but he does. And that's part of knowing Jesus, just that sort of trusting, knowing, not thinking because I followed all the rules so well and I'm such a good girl, God's going to reward me. It's nothing like that. That's a lie of the devil that makes us think I can be good enough to get God's attention. That's not how it goes. You have God's attention. He's with you always. And all you need to do is pull him into every moment of your life, the good ones, the bad ones, the easy ones, the hard ones. Don't forget about him when it's easy and fun. Pull him in always, just with an awareness of saying, I thank you for my food, God. As you get in your car, keep me safe on the road. As you are going into conversation with your kid and it's going to be rough, guide the words that I say. Let the love that you have for my child be the one that comes out, not my humanness, not my anger, not my short temper. Help me always to show my kids who you are. Because as we do that, we raise kids with this insider, solid knowledge that God is real, that can't be shattered, can't be shaken, can't be taken out. And even when it seems like our kids are out on the sea of life, like ready to really make some bad mistakes, having a rough time rowing, things are not going very well, God is always there. And what's important is that they know it in here, and that they have a sense of, I know God and I can trust him.